I thought I had seen every kind of heartbreak life had to offer, until the day I found my granddaughter Leela sitting alone in a mall food court, counting coins just to buy a meal for herself and her little girl. I asked her where the car was, the one I had gifted her with love and pride, and her voice broke as she told me her husband Oliver and his mother had taken everything from her. Her car, her house, her savings, even threatening to take custody of her daughter if she dared to leave. In that moment, I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I simply placed my hand over hers and said, "Don't worry, I'll deal with this." Because they made one mistake, they believed an old woman was weak, but they forgot something important. I did not survive 72 years by staying silent. My name is Alina Winslow, and I am 72 years old, and I thought my heart had already weathered every kind of storm life could offer. Until the afternoon, I saw my granddaughter sitting in a noisy mall food court, quietly counting coins beside a half eaten kid's meal. Her little girl sat beside her, swinging her legs, too young to understand why her mother's hands trembled over a pile of loose change. I asked gently where the car was, the one I had proudly gifted her when she married, and her eyes filled with tears she tried desperately to hide. She told me her husband and his mother had taken everything from her: the car, the house, the money, even threatening to take away her child if she dared to resist. I didn't shout. I didn't make a scene. I just took her hands in mine and said softly, "Don't worry, darling, I'll deal with this." Once the first tear escaped, the rest followed like rain breaking through clouds. She tried to speak calmly, but the words kept tripping over sobs as she explained how slowly everything had been taken from her, one possession, one piece of freedom at a time. She had been told she wasn't responsible enough to manage money, so accounts were moved. She was better off not driving, so the car disappeared. Every decision was framed as care, yet each one left her with less control over her own life. And when she finally questioned it, the threats began, whispered warnings that her child could be taken if she caused problems. Shame weighed on her. She believed it was somehow her fault. But as she spoke, the picture became painfully clear. This wasn't love. This was control dressed up as concern. She had always been gentle, trusting, eager to please, the kind of soul who gives second chances before realizing there should never have been a first. Listening to her story, the signs of emotional and financial abuse stood out like flashing lights: isolation, dependence, fear, and underneath it all, the quiet strategy of people who wanted power, not partnership. She thought she was weak for staying, but all her grandmother saw was a young mother trapped by manipulation she never saw forming around her. It wasn't weakness, it was kindness exploited by cruelty. And that realization lit a spark of fierce protectiveness that burned hotter than anger ever could. When she confronted them, they didn't shout or curse. They smiled, calm, patronizing. They told her everything they'd taken was for her own good, that she wasn't capable of managing adult responsibilities without guidance. Her husband repeated his mother's words like a script, insisting she should be grateful they were keeping her safe. They called her dramatic, emotional, unstable. They said if she didn't cooperate, they'd make sure her child grew up far away from her bad influence. They wrapped cruelty in sweet voices and polite sentences, and that somehow made it even more vicious. They believed they were untouchable. They believed no one would ever challenge them. Fear slowly replaced her confidence. Friends faded away, either pushed out or made to feel unwelcome. She stopped going places she loved, stopped making choices for herself, stopped trusting her own thoughts. She wasn't allowed opinions, only permission. And every time she tried to push back, the threat returned like a shadow: they could take her daughter if she didn't obey. So she shrank her world down to survival, living one anxious day at a time. On the outside, people saw a quiet young wife. Inside, she was a prisoner in her own life. And the saddest part was, she thought she deserved it. She didn't respond with loud speeches or angry vows. She simply reached across the table and wrapped her arms around the trembling young woman she had once rocked to sleep. Her voice was steady when she spoke, the kind of steady that only comes from years of surviving storms. She told her she believed her. She told her she wasn't weak. And most importantly, she told her she was no longer alone. There would be no dramatic confrontations, no reckless shouting, just a quiet promise they would take nothing more from her. Not her home, not her dignity. Not her child, not anymore. As they left the mall together, a calmness settled over her, not the calm of acceptance, but the calm that comes before a carefully planned storm. She had lived long enough to know that emotion rarely wins battles. Strategy does. She began making silent notes, dates, names, behaviors, accounts. She thought of lawyers, records, witnesses, and every protection the law grants to the vulnerable. They believed age made her harmless. They believed politeness made her powerless. They were wrong, because they saw only a grandmother. What they had really awakened was a protector. She didn't storm into their lives demanding answers that would only make them retreat deeper into lies. Instead, she observed quietly, the way only an older woman who has seen the world truly can. She noticed how every conversation was filtered through his mother, how decisions weren't discussed but delivered like instructions. She saw the way Leela flinched at raised voices, how she paused before speaking, as if checking invisible rules in her head. And the husband, polite in public, dismissive in private, treated her like a burden instead of a partner. It became painfully obvious that control wasn't accidental, it was a system. And systems can be dismantled. The deeper she looked, the clearer the theft became. The car papers no longer in Leela's name. The house suddenly joint owned, then conveniently shifted. Even savings accounts had been drained and rerouted into controlled family accounts under the mother in law's watchful authority. All done with sweet smiles and the phrase, "This is safer for you." It wasn't safe. It was erased. Piece by piece, they had stripped her identity until she existed only as an accessory in their household, valuable only when obedient. Seeing the legal proof of what had been stolen turned sadness into righteous resolve. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was exploitation. Whenever she questioned the injustice, he twisted her words effortlessly. He called her forgetful, dramatic, and ungrateful. He told her she misunderstood conversations that had never actually taken place. His mother chimed in, dripping false concern, insisting they were only trying to help a young, emotional girl who couldn't manage big responsibilities. Eventually, she began doubting her own memory, exactly as they intended. Was the cruelty of gaslighting. It didn't just steal your possessions, it stole your certainty. Watching this unfold made the older woman's chest ache. Love should never require silence. Partnership should never require fear. So, without announcing her intentions, she made an appointment with a seasoned lawyer, a calm, sharp minded woman who had seen too many victims arrive too late. They reviewed documents together, tracing signatures, property transfers, financial authorizations. The lawyer didn't gasp. She didn't dramatize, she simply nodded slowly, her expression darkening with each page. What had been done wasn't just immoral, much of it was potentially illegal. Fraud, coercion, undue influence. The law, it seemed, had not abandoned them. It had simply been waiting to be called. Evidence emerged like hidden ink under light. Documents showed manipulated transfers, transactions marked with subtle pressure. Authorization forms agreed to under emotional threat. Each piece strengthened the case that Leela had never willingly surrendered control, she had been cornered into it. The older woman gathered everything carefully, labeling folders, storing copies, ensuring nothing could mysteriously disappear. This wasn't revenge. This was protection wrapped in precision and calm. With steady support behind her, Leela slowly began reclaiming her spirit. She spoke more firmly. She stopped apologizing for existing. She admitted tearfully, bravely, that she had been afraid for far too long. And when told that the law stood on her side, something inside her shifted. Fear didn't vanish overnight, but hope finally had room to breathe. For the first time in years, she began to believe she wasn't trapped forever. They didn't announce their plans. They smiled politely at family dinners, nodded through conversations, and answered calls with calm voices, all while building an unbreakable legal wall behind the scenes. Bank statements. Witnesses, audio, paper trails, quiet strength. Every step was deliberate, measured, and hidden beneath ordinary daily life. Because storms don't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes they arrive in silence, carrying justice with them. She began with the one thing that doesn't lie: numbers. Bank statements, loan records, tax filings, transaction logs, all laid out across the dining table like a battlefield map. Line by line, she traced where money had gone, when it had moved, and whose signature had authorized it. Patterns emerged, large transfers just before documents were changed, balances shifted quietly into controlled accounts, debts placed in Leela's name while assets slid elsewhere. Every number told a story, and none of those stories matched the gentle lies the family had been feeding her. Calmly, methodically, she highlighted and copied everything, knowing truth was only powerful when preserved. What they had stolen wasn't just money, it was security. And she was taking it back. The lawyer's team dug deeper, peeling back financial layers like old wallpaper. That's when hidden accounts began to surface, funds registered under shell names, transfers disguised as reimbursements, investments opened quietly but controlled entirely by the mother-in-law. Money that was once Leela's now lived inside accounts she couldn't even access. None of this had been accidental. It was a calculated strategy to trap her with nothing, financially dependent and emotionally broken. Seeing the proof on official records removed any lingering doubt. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was theft dressed in paperwork and politeness. Former employees and distant relatives began to speak, carefully, anonymously, always checking over their shoulders. They described a long pattern of control, intimidation, and subtle manipulation. Careers had been threatened, friendships destroyed. Anyone who challenged the family's authority found themselves quietly pushed out. They admitted they'd seen the same tactics used on Leela: kindness first, then control, then fear. Every whispered confession became another brick in the growing wall of truth. And the more people talked, the clearer it became that this wasn't an isolated situation, it was a cycle. When confronted with carefully worded legal inquiries, his mother's polished exterior began to crack. Her responses grew defensive, cold, and sharp. She slipped, contradicting herself, inflating stories, pretending ignorance in one sentence and authority in the next. That was exactly what they needed, proof that control had never been accidental. It was a choice. Intent, strategy. Every arrogant email and dismissive message strengthened the case. Slowly, the mask she had worn for years began to crumble, exposing something far less elegant beneath the surface. Once a few witnesses spoke, others gathered the courage to follow. Neighbors, friends, former coworkers. Each had a small piece of the puzzle, a harsh word overheard, a threat witnessed, a conversation that suddenly made sense in hindsight. None of them wanted attention. They simply wanted truth to exist somewhere beyond whispering. Their statements were gathered carefully, respectfully, and stored safely. And with every new voice, the once powerful family grew smaller and smaller. The lawyer assembled everything with disciplined precision: documents, recordings, statements, timelines, valuations. Nothing was emotional, nothing was exaggerated. It was simply the truth, calm, organized, and undeniable. Legal motions were prepared quietly, ensuring that when the moment came, there would be no way for the guilty to scramble or hide. They weren't just fighting back. They were building a shield, one that would finally protect the young mother who had been cornered for so long. While the legal gears began to turn, she focused on the most important thing: safety. Leela and her daughter stayed close, surrounded not by fear this time, but by support and certainty. She made sure there was food, warmth, laughter, and reminders that love didn't demand silence. For the first time in years, the young mother slept without the constant dread of losing her child. And the older woman watched quietly, her resolve stronger than ever. They had truth now, and truth is a shield no bully can withstand forever. The day the court papers were filed, there was no dramatic announcement, no shouting, no confrontation, just quiet legal precision, petitions, freezing orders, emergency protections. Each document carried the weight of months of preparation, truth carefully arranged line by line. The in-laws received the notice like a bolt of lightning striking a glass tower. For years, they had moved freely, confident no one would ever question them, let alone challenge them in court. But now their power was no longer private. It was placed under the bright, impartial light of law. And that light exposes everything. Panic doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like hurried phone calls, emergency meetings, lawyers scrambling to make sense of paperwork they didn't see coming. They had believed the young mother would stay silent forever, too afraid, too dependent, too trapped. They never considered the force standing quietly behind her. Accounts were suddenly restricted, assets placed under investigation, control slipping through their fingers like sand, and for the first time, the calm confidence they wore like armor began to crack. In court, emotion didn't speak, evidence did. Financial records, transfer logs, audio clips, emails dripping with entitlement and control. Every lie they'd once coded in charm was now pinned down by timestamp reality. Their voices, once so confident, sounded smaller when played aloud in a silent courtroom. Their explanations collided with documented proof. The room didn't gasp, it simply listened. And truth did what truth always does: when finally given a stage, it stood tall. Her husband had always believed he could hide behind his mother's shadow, letting her do the talking while he played the confused victim. But records showed signatures, instructions, and decisions that led straight back to him. The polite mask slipped, revealing entitlement beneath. He tried to twist words, to claim misunderstanding, to rewrite history, but the paper trail didn't rewrite with him. His image of a loving protector shattered publicly, replaced by the reality of a willing accomplice in a system designed to break the woman he once vowed to cherish. For so long, the young mother had been terrified to speak, certain her voice would only bring more punishment. But now, standing under legal protection, she finally told her story. Calmly, clearly, without tears or theatrics. She spoke about threats whispered in kitchens, documents signed under pressure, love turned into leverage. And as she spoke, the courtroom didn't see a weak, unstable girl. They saw a survivor who had endured far more than anyone should. Her voice didn't shake. Her truth had waited too long to tremble. Their final weapon had always been the same: custody. The constant threat of taking her child if she didn't obey. But now, with the truth laid bare, that weapon shattered completely. The court saw coercion, intimidation, manipulation, not maternal concern. Legal protections were granted swiftly, shielding her and her child from further control. The fear that had once lived in her chest loosened its grip at last. No one would ever use her daughter as leverage again. Their world didn't collapse with noise. It fell apart in quiet acknowledgments, legal rulings, revoked powers, and reputations dissolving in silence. The carefully crafted facade of a respectable family crumbled under the weight of undeniable truth. People who once praised them stepped back. Allies disappeared. And at the center of the wreckage stood a grandmother who had never raised her voice, only her standards. They had mistaken kindness for weakness. They would never make that mistake again. If this story has you holding your breath, like the video and subscribe, because the moment that follows will leave you speechless. The courtroom didn't erupt in drama. Instead, it moved with a quiet seriousness that carried more weight than shouting ever could. Lawyers presented documents, recordings, witness statements, and a paper trail too detailed to refute. For the first time, the judge saw the full story, not a hysterical wife, but a woman stripped of her independence through calculated coercion. The ruling came slowly, each word deliberate. The threats were condemned. The manipulation was acknowledged. Custody leverage was rejected outright. And then came the sentence that loosened the knot around her heart. The court ruled in her favor. Her rights, her dignity, her stability, all formally restored under the seal of the law. She didn't cry, not immediately. She simply exhaled, a breath she'd been holding for far too long. The process of restoration wasn't glamorous. It was paperwork, keys returned, titles transferred back, and accounts reopened under proper legal protections. But to her, each document signed felt like a piece of herself returning home. The car once taken from her now sat safely in her driveway. The house, the one she feared losing forever, was legally secured in her name. No more signatures under pressure. No more being told she wasn't capable. She walked through familiar rooms with a new steadiness in her chest. This wasn't just the return of possessions. It was the return of freedom, the right to choose, to breathe, to exist without asking permission. Her husband and his mother didn't escape the truth. Investigations widened, exposing lies they once thought were buried. Fraud, coercion, financial exploitation. The same system they manipulated now documented every step they'd taken. Their polished image shattered in the public eye as legal actions followed, consequences not born of revenge but of accountability. They had gambled on fear, keeping her silent forever. Instead, the law spoke for her. And while she didn't celebrate their downfall, she also didn't mourn it. Some lessons are learned only when the world stops protecting the powerful. Freedom didn't erase the scars, but it gave her space to heal them. She began building a life shaped by her own choices, cooking in her own kitchen again, driving without permission, laughing without glancing over her shoulder. Therapy replaced silence. Support replaced isolation. Slowly, confidence returned, not loud or boastful, but steady and warm. She began to hold herself differently, speak differently, and believe differently. And every time doubt tried to creep back in, she remembered one truth: she had survived something designed to break her. That meant she was stronger than she ever knew. The grandmother often sat quietly, watching the young mother play with her daughter, and allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She hadn't won through rage or chaos. She had won through patience, intelligence, and unwavering love. Strength, she realized, isn't loud, it's steady. It's the ability to stay calm when the world expects you to crumble. She didn't need recognition or applause. Knowing that the people she loved were finally safe was enough. And in that stillness, peace finally found a place to rest. This time, she set boundaries that were not negotiable. No more apologies for protecting herself. No more excusing control disguised as concern. The door to manipulation had been sealed shut, legally, emotionally, spiritually. Those who once dictated her life now had no voice in it. Relationships would exist only where respect lived. Anything less was simply not allowed. She had learned the hardest truth: love without boundaries is simply surrender. And she was done surrendering in the end. The lesson wasn't about money or property. It was about love, the kind fierce enough to stand against injustice, patient enough to build a case brick by brick, and strong enough to protect generations. She had once told her granddaughter, "Don't worry, I'll deal with this." And she kept that promise, not with anger, but with wisdom. Her story became a quiet reminder to the world: never underestimate a grandmother's love, because when she fights, she doesn't just seek revenge, she seeks justice. And justice, once awakened, never forgets its way home.